The following podcast contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out-of-this-world opinions. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government. He was on stage, thousands watching. A question asked, an answer given, and then chaos. A gunshot, a neck wound, a man silenced in front of 3,000 people, and eventually the world. The headlines say it's simple, but you know, as well as I do, nothing about this feels simple. Why here? Why now? And why does the official story already have more holes than a pair of cheap socks? Maybe it was politics, maybe it was personal, or maybe it was something much bigger. Welcome to Conspiracy.
Conspiracy. Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Having Fun with Conspiracy Theories, the podcast where I dive headfirst into the weird, the wild, and the wonderful world of conspiracies. I'm Ash, your host, and I drop new episodes every single Wednesday. Quick disclaimer, this is a comedy and entertainment podcast. I joke, I rant, I spiral into tangents, and it's probably not to be taken for gospel. You get the gist. Now, if you're new here, let me break it down. Every Wednesday, I take one big theory the world can't stop whispering about, and I pull it apart piece by piece. I look at the so-called official story, weigh it against the conspiracies, and hopefully somewhere amongst it all, we figure out who's lying to us. But once we've covered our big theory of the week, the episode doesn't end there, guys, because after that, you'll want to stick around for my favourite bits of chaos, the headline of the week, tinfoil confessions, and of course, the Wacky Wheel of Weird. The three sections that are bound to make you scratch your head, have you cackling like a hyena, and questioning if we're stuck inside the Matrix. And trust me, today, every single section is gonna be wild. And remember, if you like what you hear, hit follow, leave a review, and tell your mates. The more ears we get, the more fuel I've got to keep digging into the madness. Today we're covering the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk, and there's plenty to unpack here. But before we dive into today's episode and the timeline of what happened, I do want to say this, okay? I actually felt the need to cover Charlie Kirk's assassination because of the way of the world right now. People's voices are being censored, blocked, deplatformed, not because they're violent, not because they're criminals, but because their opinions don't line up with whoever's in charge of the megaphone. And that's so dangerous, because even if you look at this podcast, it's me sharing my opinions too, right? Sometimes they're out there, sometimes they're ridiculous, and sometimes they're just me having a laugh. But I should be able to say them. You should be able to say them. Charlie should have been able to say his. No matter your politics, your religion, your worldview, nobody should be killed for speaking their mind. What happened was wrong, plain and simple, and it's exactly why we're going to pick apart every angle of it today and hopefully ensure Charlie's voice never dies. Alright, let's get into it. Before we get into what went down in Utah a couple of weeks ago, let's roll it back, because to understand why Charlie Kirk's assassination shook so many people, you need to know who the man actually was. Charlie James Kirk was born October 14th, 1993, up in the suburbs of Chicago. Can't believe he's literally just like 1 year older than me. Crazy, he's accomplished so much in his life already. Mental. His dad was an architect, his mom worked in finance, pretty normal background, but Charlie, he wasn't built for normal. While the rest of us were sneaking Alka-Pops into the park and arguing over PlayStation cheat codes, Charlie was reading Milton Friedman and scouting out ideas about freedom, markets, and faith. Eagle Scout, sharp kid, he was different from the start. Fast forward to 2012, he's now 18, and just let that sink in, 18. Most people are figuring out how to fry an egg without burning the pan, or, blagging their way into club with some fake ID if you're in America. But Charlie, he co-founded Turning Point USA at 18, right? A movement with one simple mission: challenged the stranglehold of liberal ideology on college campuses. And that idea spread like wildfire. By the mid-2010s, TPUSA, Turning Point USA, was on hundreds of campuses. By 2025, it was on over 3,500 campuses. That's 900 universities and 1,200 high schools, officially running chapters. Students in dorms, cafeterias, and church halls were slapping the TPUSA logo on banners, and they were coming out with, "We've got something to say too." They were using the slogan. Charlie became the figurehead, and he wasn't hiding in think tanks. He was out there, right? Rallies that packed thousands into arenas. The Student Action Summit in Florida, for example, could pull 5,000 young people to attend it. There was also campus tours where people lined up around the block. Even when critics showed up to heckle, Charlie loved it because he thrived on a debate. And that's what made him different. His famous "prove me wrong" tables, right? So he'd sit in the middle of campus, sign out front, and let students come at him about abortion, gender, free speech, race, you name it. And he'd go back and forth for hours. He was great at debating and giving a mic to everybody so everyone's opinions and voices could be heard. Whether he agreed or not, that's what a healthy debate is about. And when it comes to numbers, he was pulling in huge numbers, right? Because some of the clips that he would post would blow up online. Millions of views, tens of millions in some cases. One TikTok of him debating abortion in 2024 hit around 50 million views. Huge numbers. On YouTube alone, he had about 3.8 million subscribers, with the Turning Point channel adding another 3.3 million on top of that. His podcast, The Charlie Kirk Show, was racking up hundreds of thousands of downloads every single day, consistently sitting in the top 10 of Apple's political charts. On TikTok, 7 million followers watching short, sharp debate clips. Instagram, millions more. He built a digital empire and he wasn't even 30 yet. Crazy, crazy influence, right? But he wasn't just about himself. That was the magic. He told students, your voice matters too. Don't just sit there, get up, debate, and make yourself heard. He gave young people a platform to push back, to feel less alone. And this was crucial in a time where it felt like one wrong sentence could get you cancelled. Charlie was saying, say it louder. Say it with more oomph. If you believe it, say it. You are entitled to say your opinion. And behind all of that, the man lived by his values, right? In 2021, he married Erica Francevy, who was Miss Arizona USA, a businesswoman and podcaster. And by 2025, they had 2 young children. Family and faith weren't just campaign slogans for Charlie, they were his daily life. He was evangelical. He was proud of it. And more, he fused that faith into his message: God, family, country. So, here's the bottom line. Charlie Kirk wasn't a senator, he wasn't a president, but in many ways, he was more powerful. He had millions listening online, thousands showing up in person, and a movement that was growing fast. And that influence made him dangerous to people who don't want free speech, who don't want their ideas challenged. And that's why when we talk about what happened in Utah a couple of weeks ago, you've got to keep all of this in mind. Killing Charlie Kirk wasn't just about ending one man's life, it was about trying to silence a movement. Alright, so let's take a look at what happened at the assassination. And this is the part that still makes my blood run cold, so breathe with me. Picture this. So after an incredible run and an incredible career, we arrive on Wednesday, September the 10th, 2025 at Utah Valley University in the campus courtyard. The sun was out, phone cameras are up, and about 3,000 people have packed in. Students, press, supporters, critics, all there for the first stop of Charlie Kirk's American comeback tour. He's on a simple stage, answering real questions from real people. No walls, no bunker, just a guy, a mic, and a crowd he's been building for a decade. So at 12:23 p.m. local time, Charlie's answering a student's question. A kind of a back and forth about shootings and statistics. He's completely in his element. He's joking 1 second, serious the next. Then, the moment we never expected to happen, a single gunshot is heard ripping above the crowd. Charlie took the bullet in the neck, and if you've seen the video that's circulated online, it's very graphic, very, it just doesn't feel real that it happened and someone has a video of it that close. But yeah, the bullet went through Charlie's neck and he kind of falls to the side and the blood kind of comes out of his neck. You see the crowd dive to the floor, people are in shock, people diving for cover, the staff leap in, people are screaming, and this is all being captured on so many people's phones that are just streaming this chaos. And isn't that just the most 2025 thing that we have at the moment, where everything is so available at all times, even something as horrific as this? People eventually rush Charlie into an SUV and he's driven to the Timpanogos Regional Hospital. Paramedics tried, doctors tried, but the wound was catastrophic and Charlie was pronounced dead. Witnesses say that the shot came from a rooftop on the Lucy Centre, a building that overlooks that courtyard where he was having that debate. The shooter reportedly had climbed up there around 11:52 a.m, so about 30 minutes before the shot went off. CCTV and witness accounts put him on that roof with a vantage point. He had a line of sight, he had distance, and he had a rifle. The reported model of that rifle was a bolt-action 3006 Masur M98, which is a long-range, old-school hunting rifle that doesn't exactly scream panicked college kid ready to kill someone as much as it does, this seems a little bit planned. But with the crowds dispersed, the footage circulating all over the internet, and Charlie announced dead, the hunt for the shooter began. Local law enforcement start a manhunt, all of the camera footage starts to come into them, phone tips come in, Trump makes a televised announcement announcing that we are going to find this person, and within about 33 hours of it happening, the suspect was tracked down. And the way that they caught him so quickly apparently was through facial recognition, surveillance, and reportedly messages and digital breadcrumbs the suspect left behind, like text threads and Discord posts. Definitely the things that these people that do these kind of crimes put online when they're proud of planning something awful. There are messages that are circulating where apparently he talks about the rifle, about execution, about hiding evidence. Again, some of these are alleged, some are reported. It's a bit too early to know the full scope of what is going on, but there are screenshots, there are records, and the police had enough to make an arrest. So, they arrested Tyler James Robinson, who is 22, from Washington, Utah. He had no long violent rap sheet, no criminal career. He was just a kid who investigators say planned and carried this out. He's been charged with aggravated murder and a laundry list of felonies, and prosecutors are currently seeking the death penalty. Now, everyone wants motive. And listen, motive is messy in real life, but here's what's been reported. Robinson had been seething online about Charlie's words, particularly his stances on transgender issues and what Robinson framed as hate in Kirk's rhetoric. There are texts where Robinson allegedly talks about being consumed, about needing to do something to stop what he called harm, and that's what the investigators are finding, and that's what police have presented early in this case. More will develop as time goes on, obviously. So, let's be blunt here. This wasn't a random act of street violence. This was a targeted attack at a public figure in a public space, against a man who spent years telling people to get on the soapbox and use their voice. He lived to amplify speech, and someone apparently decided the right answer to speech they hate was a rifle on a rooftop. And doesn't that feel backwards? You silence a voice by killing the mouth that speaks it over an opinion that you disagree with. It's crazy. It is crazy that we live in it. If the official story holds up and it was this kid who killed another person because he didn't like that person's views on transgenderism, what the fuck are we living in? Like, grow up. Why not, instead of taking that gun, get down there on the mic and argue your point as to why your opinions are better than anybody else's? Why go and take a gun and do the exact thing that you hate other people for doing? Mental to me. Don't understand it. And it was a completely senseless killing. End of story. And if we are to believe the official story, what the hell was security doing? Because since the UVU has launched a review on that, how did a man get to a roof with a line of fire over a crowd in the first place? Did they miss the threats? Were warnings ignored? Because there were protesters who wanted the event cancelled. There were online threats before the event. So shouldn't there have been some kind of sweep of the place, or, monitoring spaces where someone could take a rifle and shoot someone? Like, if you're gonna allow people to have guns, right? Okay, this is the age-old topic of discussion, isn't it, with America? If America has guns, and they're allowed to freely use them as part of their constitutional rights and their amendments, then it is upon America and institutions to be able to deliver a great security detail to keep everyone safe. Right? If you take away the guns, okay, less pressure on the security details, or less pressure on these institutions to make sure everyone's safe. But that's not the case. America has guns, so America should have very tight laws on security. End of again. Where was the perimeter? Where was the rooftop checks? How does anyone get that vantage point at a university event with 3,000 people when people are allowed guns in the country? And those questions that rile me up are definitely questions that need to be answered for Charlie Kirk's family as well. They don't need those answers. They deserve those answers. But you definitely could feel in the crowd that day, from all the footage that there is of it, that kind of, everybody did feel safe. It wasn't a aggressive protest, or it wasn't an aggressive event, or there wasn't any, violence or anything like that. You kind of got the idea that people were showing up to a university event and it was organised and everyone was kind of in a safe space in terms of their physical body. And you could definitely see that flip, right? How it turned from a safe space into a nightmare when people were diving to the ground and screaming. And so, yeah, if this guy did shoot Charlie Kirk from that rooftop, then he's just achieved the exact opposite of what he probably stands for. But finally, I do have to say, I definitely 100% believe in due process, so I have to be a little bit careful with the why and not kind of push hate or say, oh, we did it because of this or that, because I do believe in due process. There are reported texts and messages there are alleged online posts, but the legal process will sort that out, and we can definitely do another episode that will cover the official outcome of this case and what happened. But before that, I'm not really going to dive into say, oh, it's this type of person or this group of people who did it, because it's going to take some time to unpack that. And who knows, maybe it wasn't this alleged shooter that did it. And we'll definitely look at some alternatives in a second. But with that being said, we still can't ignore that a man died for speaking his mind. And the environment of deplatforming, doxing, cancelling, stoked rage online is literally fertile soil for someone who wants to cause terror and chaos. So today, I wanted to cover Charlie's story not because I want to gossip or feed a culture warfare narrative. I cover it because free speech matters. I'm pro Charlie here, not because I agree with everything he said, but because I agree with the basic premise. Your voice should not be a target. 2 weeks ago, that principle was shot on a campus lawn, and that's the part that terrifies me more than anything else. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the official story, who Charlie Kirk was, and what happened 2 weeks ago. But if you're thinking that things don't quite add up, then you're not alone, because next up we're moving to conspiracy versus official narrative, taking a look at some theories that change the narrative of this event completely. Was this a lone radicalised kid? A politically motivated assassination? A false flag to stir the culture? A security failure that the university wants to sweep under the rug? We'll take a look at some theories, we'll weigh the evidence, and we'll compare it to the official story, okay? But we'll do it in the conspiracy way, with skepticism, some humour thrown in there, and with the kind of blunt questions the mainstream won't ask. But before we do, breathe. Think about what that crowd felt. Think about the children who watched it happen. Think about a world where saying what you believe might get you killed. That is a world we shouldn't be living in. So let's take a look at our first theory, that this was a political assassination. So if you picture it at Utah Valley University courtyard, 3,000 people shoulder to shoulder, Charlie Kirk, the man who built his career on inviting confrontation, stands at the mic, daring someone to change his mind. His rallies weren't polite lectures, they were arenas of argument. And that's the heart of this theory, because if you wanted to silence him, you wouldn't argue harder, you'd strike. Not in private, not off stage, but in the middle of a campus debate. You turn a Q&A into a warning. One shot in front of thousands of people sends a chill through an entire generation of free speech advocates. This wasn't just killing the man, it was killing the movement. Now, the official story wouldn't agree with that theory, because police do say yes, the motive is political, but only in a very narrow sense. Their narrative is a lone 22-year-old Tyler James Robertson, radicalised online, angry at Charlie's stance on gender policies. He researched, he posted rants on Discord, he left a clear trail, and according to officials, this was a personal obsession, not a larger political hit. The skeleton of the story matches political anger led to violence, but the official line kind of ends there. But there are some holes in that official story that do point to a political assassination, i.e. the weapon of choice, a vintage Mauser M98 sniper rifle. That's not an impulse weapon, that's theatre. A deliberate choice, heavy symbolism, long-range precision. It screams planning a message, not a chaotic rage. And the venue, a university courtyard with balconies, roofs and clear sightlines. If you wanted to terrorise the debate me culture, this is the stage you'd use, right? And the timing of it, right as Charlie ramps into his campus tour season. Coincidence? Or carefully scripted to strike maximum fear into the exact audience he was rallying? On plausibility, this one scores pretty high. The idea that it was a straight up political assassination does make sense because of the symbolism. The weapon, the setting, the crowd. It fits a little too perfectly. Do I buy that it was Robinson, alone, pulling off all of this for personal rage? Not fully. The bones of the official story may be true, but the bigger picture feels staged. This was theatre, not a tantrum. The next theory is that it comes down to an inside job because if you can't stop an event outright, you shape it. Charlie Kirk was a high-profile, controversial speaker, right? Standard protocol for any high-risk public figure, you sweep rooftops, secure entry points, and post eyes everywhere. Yet on that day, one roof apparently remains unsecured. Then if you add in the fact that the footage circulating showing the two men standing just to the right of Charlie were making some very weird, quick, synchronized hand gestures seconds just before he was shot, to some you could say that they were just nervous standing there, but to many others it looks like a signal, like they are giving the signal to take the shot. So if this is the case, then the theory goes that it isn't just a lone gunman slipping through. Someone would have opened the door, turned a blind eye, or played a part in stage managing the chaos. Now, although that the official story does admit that security is under review, Utah Valley University confirms an independent investigation into event safety and procedures, but the official framing is that it was an isolated lapse. Human error maybe, not collaboration, no conspiracy. The hand gesture clip was just ignored, not addressed at all in briefings, and authorities treat that as kind of background noise. However, looking at the holes in that story, you've got the rooftop access. Universities hosting controversial figures know the drill. Clear the roofs. If that roof wasn't swept, then why? And if it was, how did a shooter lug a vintage rifle up there without anyone noticing? You've also then got the timing of the hand gestures. Just seconds before the shot, these hand gestures take place. It's never been explained, and might never be explained. Even if it was them kind of nervous or panicking and not doing hand gestures, how did two separate men anticipate a shot before it rang out? And what about the place where the rifle was taken to anyway? Even if there was a rooftop sweep, it must have also been a kind of blind spot. If security was present, how was there no spotter on that angle at all when it was a clear line sight to Charlie's neck? Unless, of course, the absence was deliberate. So at the very least, this is a catastrophic security failure, but at worst, it's an inside job. Not necessarily a grand cabal, but one or more people ensuring conditions were perfect for the hit. The fact that the hand signal movement has been ignored in official narratives is telling, because if you want plausible deniability, you wouldn't need dozens of accomplices, just one or two people to leave one door unlocked, one roof unchecked, and one blind spot open. But until UVU publishes full roof access logs and CCTV, this theory stays hot, and will probably get hotter over the next few months. And next theory is that Tyler Robinson is just a fall guy. So this is the patsy theory, right? The idea that Robinson wasn't the real shooter, but the convenient scapegoat. The narrative goes like this. The assassination had to have a clean ending. The public needed a villain, and fast. And within 72 hours, police present Tyler James Robinson, 22 years old, angry posts online, political motive, family ID, box ticked, case closed. But when you look at the still images from the courtyard, the silhouette on the rooftop, the long coat, hat, the stance, too many of them don't match the mugshots later released of Robinson. The roof figure looks bulkier, older, and with different proportions, yet this discrepancy was never really publicly addressed. Definitely circulating online though. Also, when you look at the turnaround time, it was only 33 hours from assassination to the suspect being arrested, which even, raised even more eyebrows. The speed of that feels a bit suspiciously convenient for an investigation involving thousands of witnesses, hours of CCTV, and forensic work. So, was Robinson slotted in as the suspect while the real shooter slipped away unseen? The official story doesn't agree because the official position is airtight. Police claim digital evidence ties Robinson directly, his Discord chats, the messages, even draft manifestos. His family also reportedly confirmed his identity in the CCTV stills, and the rifle was traced back to a relative's collection. The timeline is painted as efficiency, not rushed. Lone wolf, case closed. There are some more holes in that official story though, because the rooftop images versus the mug shots, clothing layers, lighting and compression can distort images, true, but when multiple frames from multiple angles show the same mismatch, it becomes harder to dismiss. Why has no one in law enforcement publicly acknowledged or explained this? The arrest speed, 33 hours, is blazing fast, unless the suspect literally left a breadcrumb trail, and if he did, why hasn't the full digital record been shown? Where are the screenshots, the leaked manifestos, the raw Discord logs? And also the second shooter angle. If Robinson wasn't the man on the roof, either he was set up as the fall guy or played a different role entirely. Maybe he was a spotter, courier, post-event patsy. Without full CCTV release, unedited by the way, we're asked to take official confirmation on faith. So I definitely don't buy that Robinson is squeaky clean. The digital trail points to some involvement, but I also don't buy that he was the lone sniper. There's too many gaps, too much speed in the investigation, too many questions about the images. If the public doesn't get access to the raw footage, the uncompressed stills and the full timeline, then the fall guy theory will stay alive, for sure. The bottom line is that Robinson may be guilty of something, but was he the man on the roof at that angle with that rifle? I'm not convinced. And finally, let's take a look at the media angle, because who writes the first draft of reality? The media. And in this case, the script was finished almost before the smoke cleared. Within hours of the assassination, graphics were prepped, anchors were reading lone shooter chirons, and the narrative was cemented. Young radical, political grievance, case closed. So this could be seen as, it's not just efficiency, it's choreography. The idea is that when media outlets move in lockstep, it isn't by accident. It's either because they've been handed talking points or because they know straying outside the official narrative will get them shut down. The effect is simple but powerful. The public hears lone shooter repeated across every outlet, and that becomes the mental cement. Any other explanation feels fringe. Officials insist the press simply follow police briefings. Lone shooter, politically motivated, case closed. Newsrooms argue that they move quickly because the facts were obvious. So there's no grand conspiracy, just journalists reporting what was in front of them. When you take a look at the holes in that story, you get that uniformity. Almost no mainstream outlet questioned the rooftop access, the weapon choice, the hand gesture footage, or the image mismatch. At best, those details were buried. At worst, just ignored. You got the opacity. Why hasn't a single outlet demanded full CCTV release? Why no clamour for roof access logs, security staffing rosters, or ballistic details? If the story is so airtight, why no appetite for transparency? And you've got the narrative shift. Coverage moved almost instantly from what happened to how do we heal? Memorials, vigils, campus reviews. All important, yes, but suspiciously quick for an event of this magnitude. So, the media didn't pull the trigger, but they may as well have locked the story in concrete. Whether from haste, bias, or pressure, the result is the same. The official narrative became the only narrative. This is the classic frustration in the conspiracy world. It's because the anomalies are there, but no one in the mainstream dares to touch them. And that silence is its own form of complicity. So where does that leave us? You've got the political assassination, yes, plausible, even likely given Charlie's prominence, but rage alone doesn't explain the theatre of it. The inside job, this theory has teeth. You've got unsecured rooftops and ignored hand gestures. They don't just happen. The fall guy theory, Robinson may be involved, but whether he was the sniper is far less certain. The image mismatch and the speed of the arrest keep this one alive for sure. And how the media shape things is undeniable. The press poured the wet cement and told us not to poke at it. Now, to me, this doesn't smell like a one-man tantrum. It smells like something bigger, cleaner, tidier than real life usually is. But, and it's a big but, the case is a bit too fresh. With only one arrest and carefully managed narratives, the truth is still buried. Out of respect for Charlie, and because it's simply too soon to fully unpick, I have to give this week to the official narrative. And that doesn't mean we stop asking, quite the opposite actually. If anything, it means we owe it to Charlie to keep digging. Who opened that roof? Who made those hand gestures? Who chose that rifle? Those answers will tell us who really pulled the trigger, and I'm sure we'll do another episode on this in the future. And that brings us to the end of the Charlie Kirk story, or at least the end of the version we're allowed to hear. Officially, it's neat, 1 shooter, 1 rifle, 1 motive, case closed, but when you dig into it, the hand signals, the roof access, the image mismatches, the speed of the arrest, the way the media welded the narrative shot in under 24 hours, doesn't feel like we had any closure. It kind of just feels like this is the first draft in a long history. So whether you think it was a lone wolf, an inside job, a fool guy, or something deeper, one fact is unshakable. Charlie Kirk was taken out in front of thousands, and the shockwave is still rolling through America and the world. Free speech took a bullet that day, and until we get straight answers, the only honest response is to keep asking questions. And I'm sure the truth, the real truth, won't stay buried forever. Alright, deep breath. So now that we're at the end of our main theory, let's lighten things up a little bit, because you know what time it is. Let's cross over to the studio. This week's top story: Jimmy Kimmel has been yanked off the air. Disney suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live after his monologue on Charlie Kirk's assassination, where he accused MAGA of exploiting the tragedy. Officially, it was called ill-timed and insensitive, but unofficially, it has become the world's most expensive tinfoil hat party. Over 200 Hollywood stars signed an open letter condemning the suspension. Actors, musicians, and even that one bloke from Sharknado 4 signed the letter. They claim this isn't about one comedian, this is a test run, a dry rehearsal for pulling the plug on anyone with too much influence. First it's Jimmy, tomorrow it's Joe Rogan, and by next week, they'll be coming for CONSPIRASHY. We now go live to our field correspondent Jake in Los Angeles, who's been monitoring the situation from outside a vegan taco truck near Sunset Boulevard. Thanks, Ash. Atmosphere here is tense. Paparazzi are circling. I did spot one A-list actor sobbing into his kale smoothie. Locals tell me Kimmel's removal is part of a wider plan. Silence late-night comedians and replace them with AI holograms who only tell knock-knock jokes about climate change. Back to you in the studio. Thanks, Jake. Strong reporting as always. Now, what are the theories we're hearing? Some say Kimmel uncovered too much dirt during the writers' strike negotiations. Others say the network bosses didn't actually like his jokes about Pfizer. No wonder. And the favourite of this week, Jimmy's being prepped for rebranding, like when Disney put Frozen on ice to cover up cryogenics. What if late night comedy is just a cover for elite programming messages and Jimmy went off script? We now go over to Marcus in Washington, D.C., watching the political fallout. Ash, insiders here say Trump's allies cheered the suspension. Some even pressured networks that license threats. Disney folded quicker than a cheap deck chair. But now that Kimmel's been reinstated, folks are whispering again. Was this a punishment? Or just a warning shot? Well, I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Back to you in the studio. Thanks, Marcus. We'll keep you updated on that as more is announced. We are now receiving some breaking news, though, and it's that an anonymous insider claims Kimmel hasn't been suspended at all. He's actually in a government bunker teaching lizard people how to nail a punchline before the 2028 elections. If they master the timing, we're screwed. So, was this just a workplace spat, or is Jimmy Kimmel the canary in the coal mine for censorship in the entertainment industry? Either way, next time you hear a late night monologue, remember, it might not be the comedian talking, it might be the algorithm. And that was your headline of the week.
The tinfoil confessions.
Alright, so it's time once again for Tinfoil Confessions, the part of the show where you lot send in your weirdest stories, and I sit here smiling that I've become the official Lost Property Office for aliens, ghosts, and government cover-ups. This week's confession comes from Mike in Ohio, and it's our first confession from an American listener, so thank you so much for sending this in, Mike. I had a great time reading it, and I just had to include it in today's episode. So, let's take a look. Here's what Mike wrote in. Hey Ash, big fan of the podcast. I'm writing from Ohio, and I've got a story my dad used to tell that always gives me the chills. Back in the 90s, my old man was huge into ham radio. He had the whole basement rigged up like mission control, wires hanging everywhere, these giant antennas on the roof that made our house look like a TV station. Mom used to joke he was trying to call E.T. Well, I mean, if your dad's rocking NASA kit in the basement, E.T.'s probably calling back. Answer the call. Anyway, back to the story. So one night around 2 a.m, Dad's tuning through the shortwave bands. Out of nowhere, the static cuts out and he hears this metallic voice. A real clear, robotic voice that says, "This is not a test. Prepare." "This is not a test. Prepare." And then nothing. Just dead air. He said it felt like the whole room went quiet, like the air got heavy. He sat there frozen, waiting for more, but nothing came back. Well, I can't imagine that happened in the mid-90s. No internet, no smartphones, no TikTok to go viral with it. Just you, a radio, and a robot voice telling you to prepare. Also, prepare for what, mate? Like, dinner? Doom? The Spice Girls reunion? I don't know. Like, what's going on? Anyway, he goes on to say, next day, 2 guys in black suits show up at the house. Black car, shiny as hell. They asked my dad about radio interference and whether he picked up anything unusual. My dad played dumb and tells them no. They glance around the basement, nod to each other, and leave. He never touched that ham radio again and said it wasn't worth the risk. Okay, so we got a case of the classic Men in Black. Except this is in Ohio, so odds are it was just Steve and Bob from the local broadband company pretending to be important, I guess. Still, 2 blokes in black knocking at the door after a robot voice says prepare. Pretty much how sci-fi and horror films start. Ohio, close that radio for good and get on with your business. So he closes with, to this day, Dad swears it was real. He said it wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a prank. It felt like a broadcast meant for someone else, but he just so happened to catch it. And every now and then, when the power cuts out during a storm, he'll mutter under his breath, "Not again." It freaks me out every time. Yeah, I can imagine. Imagine being traumatized by a radio so badly that every time the Wi-Fi cuts, you're like, oh no, it's happening again. The metallic voice is back. Tell you, if I was experiencing that, I'd be having kittens how bad my Wi-Fi is, let me tell ya. So, there you have it. A robot voice on the radio, a prepare warning, and Men in Black turning up in Ohio. So was it a glitch? A government test? Or was Mike's dad accidentally tuning into the Galactic Emergency Channel? Either way, the ham sandwiches weren't the only thing spooky in that basement. So thank you so much, Mike, for sending that in. I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you've got a story like Mike's, I want it. So send it in. DM me on Insta or TikTok @conspiracy or email conspiracy@gmail.com. Your madness fuels this segment, and who knows, next week it could be your tinfoil confession.
The Wacky Wheel of Weird.
And now it's time for our final section, my favourite bit of chaos, the Wacky Wheel of Weird. So here's how it works. I've got a big old digital wheel, each slice of it covered in the strangest, silliest, most ridiculous conspiracies known to mankind. These are the ones that aren't quite big enough for a full conspiracy deep dive, but do deserve 5 minutes of pure chaos. So some of these are going to make you laugh, some will make you scratch your head, and some will make you question whether humanity's collective brain has literally melted. So without further ado, let's spin the wheel and see what madness the universe wants us to explore today. And today's wheel lands on the Philadelphia experiment. So, let me put it up. Okay, Philadelphia experiment. So, picture it. 1943, the US Navy's in the middle of World War II, and someone in a lab coat says, hey, what if we made an entire battleship invisible? Because, guns and torpedoes weren't dramatic enough. So, the story goes, they tested it on the USS Eldridge. Massive destroyer, loads of sailors on board. They fire up the generators and poof, the ship vanishes. Not camouflage, not a smokescreen, literally gone. Here's where it gets even weirder. Witnesses swear the Eldridge didn't just vanish, it teleported. Some say it reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away, before blinking back to Philly like a drunk uncle at Christmas dinner. And when the smoke cleared, chaos. Sailors supposedly fused into the walls of the ship. I'm talking arms sticking out of steel bulkheads like a bad magic trick. Others burst into flames, some vanished completely, and a handful, well, they came back babbling about being in another dimension. So, imagine you join the Navy for a steady paycheck and end up part of the decor. Congrats, son, you're now a coat rack. So the Navy, of course, denies it all. Their line is, never happened, just a myth. But eyewitnesses claim otherwise. A guy named Carlos Allende wrote a detailed letter to a researcher in the 1950s, swearing he saw it happen from another ship. He described men screaming, bodies stuck in the deck, and that's not the kind of bedtime story you just make up for fun. Theorists say the Navy was messing with Einstein's unified field theory, blending space and time with electromagnetism. Basically, the Eldridge wasn't cloaked, it was shoved through a wormhole by accident. And you could trust leave it to the government to try teleportation and end up with human Jenga. Also, some believe the tech didn't disappear. It went black budget, hidden, folded into other programs. They pointed to UFO sightings near Navy bases, stealth projects decades ahead of schedule, and even the infamous Montauk project as spin-offs. So, what do we think? Was it just a wartime myth exaggerated by bored sailors? Or did the Navy accidentally crack teleportation only to realise, oh crap, we've turned half the crew into ghost furniture? Either way, next time you're on a ferry or a cruise, just pray the captain doesn't say, engage invisibility drive. And that was this week's Wacky Wheel of Weird. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Having Fun with Conspiracies. We've gone deep into Charlie Kirk's story, political rage, inside jobs, Fall Guys, false flags, media puppetry, you name it. We've chased Jimmy Kimmel through Hollywood bunkers, taken a ham radio trip to Ohio with a robot voice telling us to prepare, and we don't know what to prepare for. And we've just teleported through the Philadelphia experiment where sailors got turned into coat racks. So maybe the official stories are neat little packages, maybe the conspiracies are messy webs, but one thing's for sure, someone, somewhere, is lying to us. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, do me a favour, hit follow, leave a review, and tell a mate who loves a good conspiracy. That's how we grow this little tinfoil community. And don't forget, follow me on Insta and TikTok at Conspiracy. Drop me your own theories and stories at conspiracy@gmail.com and leave a cheeky 5-star review wherever you listen, because it keeps us in the charts and out of the shadow bans. And next week, who knows what the wheel, the inbox, or the headlines will bring, but one thing's for sure, it will be just as unhinged as ever. Until next time, keep your tinfoil hats polished, keep questioning everything, and remember, the truth is out there.